I'm just looking again at this video of Joe Biden with the gospel singers. Who looks at that and says what he needs is another 4-year term as president of the most powerful country on the earth? We've just sent it to the director. See if we can put it up on the stage. It is truly remarkable, even by Joe Biden's standards. Yes, he pooed his pants on the stage at the D-Day celebrations. Yes, he bent down in order to do so, like anyone who's ever had a toddler knows is the case. Yes, he was led away, finally and belatedly, by Dr. Jill Biden. But the question is, how long can this farce be allowed to continue? How long can the Americans pretend that this man is in charge? How long can the Americans pretend that this man is fit to have the nuclear football at his disposal? He could actually send the entire planet up in nuclear smoke whilst thinking he's ringing for an orderly or for the lavatory. This farce must end, and surely it will end if Joe Biden is the candidate in a Donald Trump victory. In which case, a whole new set of variables kick in. Hunter Biden is almost certain to go to jail for decades, at least if the judges follow the advice given by Joe Biden when a senator for other people convicted of the same offenses as his. In fact, you follow the Biden punishment policy, Hunter is going down for 25 years. The crack smoking, underage sex addict who bought an automatic weapon whilst under the influence of crack. It's definitely a 25-year stretch if Joe Biden's policy is to be implemented. Now, what does all this mean for the American presidential election? We'll be talking to the very sharp American commentator Anya Parampil about this later in the show. But Europe is where most of my attention has been this year. The European Parliament elections were truly remarkable. The AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, the German Nationalist Party, scored a thumping victory over little soldier Schulz and an even bigger thumping victory over bonkers Baerbock, the stupidest foreign minister in the history of the world. You know, the one who accused one of our rivals of making a 360-degree turn. But the reality is the French general election is now going to attract most attention. It's an emergency general election called by President Macron because Marine Le Pen got 34% to his 14.9%. A humiliating rebuff that threatens the very nature of the French Republic itself, because Marine Le Pen has said that she's going to take France out of the new world order and that Macron is going to be under arrest. Well, that's what you call a constitutional standoff, because if Marine Le Pen wins a majority, as surely she now must, at least a plurality of the French Assemblée Nationale, then we're going to have a cohabitation of the most turbulent sort, with a different majority in the Assembly and a different political stripe in the presidential palace. Little Macron is done, finished, kippered. He might as well take his young bride away for a very long cruise. Because the reality is the public all over Europe demonstrated, in France, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Austria, and in Germany, a dramatic switch to anti-globalist parties, mainly of the right. Not the far right, this casual, foolish designation of everybody as a Nazi is, of course, a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the right, the nationalists, have trumped the globalists. They've trumped the WEF. They've trumped Davos. They've trumped the EU and they have trumped NATO, because the proximate reason for the total annihilation of the centre ground in the European Parliament elections is the economic crisis brought on by NATO's demand that these European governments sanction Russia, sanction themselves from cheap energy, buy expensive American energy instead, and see their industries literally ship out in the case of Germany and fall and fall and fall according to the other European economies. The public ain't going to take it anymore. Macron's idea of sending French forces to march into Odessa and start World War III is now dead in the water. And the idea that the European economies are going to send endless shed loads of money to little Zelensky, the chief martial law administrator in Ukraine, is also now dead. There's going to be a dramatic shift in European politics. And von der Leyen, whose father was, of course, a Nazi officer, has said it will be business as usual, but everybody knows that it will not, because in Germany and very soon in France and right across Europe, all these governments have got to face their people in an election in the same year that the British and the Americans are facing crucial elections. Let me turn to the British election and the counterpart of Le Pen, the counterpart of the AFD, the counterpart of Wilders, the counterpart of Meloni, by the name of Nigel Farage, is back in frontline politics. And I predicted that he would double the public opinion poll ratings of his party. It's really a private company called Reform UK brackets Limited. Quite new ground this in British politics, that Farage would take the Reform Party to hitherto undreamt of heights. And it looks like I am correct. I often am. I said that Nigel Farage is the smiling assassin of British nationalist politics. He's a conservative who's a more conservative, more palatable, more cheerful, more persuasive than the official Conservative Party. He will inherit the Conservative Party. He'll either inherit its dead body, or he may actually inherit the party as a whole, in toto, such as it is after the forthcoming British general election. There might be a merger, a kind of hostile takeover by the smaller party, the Reform Party, which might not even, in the end, turn out to be the smaller. It may be that Nigel Farage is in command of a very substantial block of Reform MPs. Here in Rochdale, where I'm fighting the election, it's kind of obvious already that his party is my number one rival, which is not the reason I'm talking about it, although it would be a good enough reason, because, of course, the point of all these nationalist parties is to scapegoat minorities, and it will start with racial and religious minorities, but it will not end there. These parties always have to have a whipping boy, because none of them, and Meloni is the acme, the exemplar of this, none of them are prepared to actually confront openly the forces that are really responsible for the misery of scores, hundreds of millions of people all across Europe. They cannot, will not, determine not to confront the system, the globalized capitalist system, which has beggared and plunged into penury and cold with its net zero 2030, net zero 2050. We're all going to be cold as well as poor. And none of these right-wing parties will do anything about that. None of them will nationalize key industries in their countries. None of them will actually withdraw from the euro. None of them will actually withdraw from the European Union. None of them will leave NATO. And although they don't want war with Russia, none of them will give Russia its money back either, and establish real economic relations again with the booming Russian and Chinese economies. None of them will do that because in the end, their radicalism is false, or faux if you are French. Whereas people like me, people like Mélenchon, people like Sarah Wagenknecht in Germany, we are serious about it. We don't want the EU. We don't want the Euro. We don't want NATO. And we will not go to war for Joe Biden, a man who cannot even control the inner workings of his own body. We will not do it. And we will take whatever measures are necessary to rescue our people from this economic death spiral in which we have been plunged. Now, you're going to have to accept that the sun is rising in the east. It doesn't have to set in the west, only if you insist upon a zero-sum game competition with the east does it need to set in the west, because we simply cannot win any zero-sum game. We've lost at the starting line. My own brother-in-law arrived in Shanghai maybe a month ago, and he's already decided he's staying in China. He's asking for permission to live the rest of his life and work in China. And if you've ever been in Shanghai, if you've ever seen Shanghai, you know the reason why. It's like night and day. It is like being in the future and then stepping back into the past. Labour in Britain have just said that they're going to fill 1 million potholes. First of all, that's how many potholes we've got. Actually, times 5. What are they going to fill them with? They're not going to spend any extra money because they can't spend any extra money. That would require taking some of the money of the multi-billionaires that have made such fortunes in the COVID and post-COVID areas. They are going to fill them perhaps with Keir Starmer's broken pledges. But my point is, there ain't no potholes in China. There ain't no potholes in Shanghai. My wife's just arrived on a train, hours late, with no air conditioning, with no coffee on board the train. In Shanghai to Beijing, you travel about 300 kilometers an hour, and you can balance your coffee endlessly filled up on the windowsill and it will not spill. China is in a different planet to us. Russia and China are now the closest possible allies. What an achievement of American statecraft that is. Here's my point. We cannot win competition with the rising sun in the east. What we needed to do, haven't done, but will have to do, if there's to be any future for us, is try and get close to those people whose sun is rising. Offer them the services that we have to offer. Offer them the centuries of wisdom and learning and technology in the medical field, for example. Offer them places in our fine universities. Find the things we've still got that can be of use to the East in its renaissance. We could do that. We could play that role. But not if we've got governments whose only discourse is to wag a finger, shake a fist, and threaten the people who are leaving us floundering in their slipstream. And that's why the British general election result is actually going to mean almost nothing at all. You will not notice one iota of difference if the power in Britain switches from Rishi Sunak to Keir Starmer. When I say they're two cheeks of the same backside, actually they are one cheek of the same backside. They are indistinguishable. Neither deserves to be described in any other way. You will find no difference in the foreign policy. You will find no difference in the domestic policy. You'll find no difference in the cultural and social questions. Neither of the two front benches can define what a woman is. Both of the front benches think that a woman can have a penis and a man can have a cervix. Both of them will be on the endless LGBTQ plus A, or I missed out the 2SL. They're all on the same cultural, social page. They're all Blairites now. And that's why the British general election, unless Farage breaks through, unless we break through, will lead to the switching off of the Parliament channel all over the land. Nobody will be interested in anything that is happening in the British Parliament because nothing of any importance will be happening. Which leaves me time only to discuss the subject of our poll tonight. Will Israel accept the peace deal? Yes or no? Well, the truthful answer is maybe yes, maybe no. If Netanyahu stays in the saddle, and that's a moot question, then maybe yes, and maybe for a little while. If Netanyahu is overthrown, then it's maybe no. One thing is for sure. Neither Israel nor the Western governments that bankroll it, arm it, give it diplomatic protection on the international scene, and the mass media propaganda support is in any doubt there will be no Palestinian state. And without a Palestinian state, all of this is going to start again. And so I'm announcing here a war crimes tribunal, which I intend to set up soon as we've got the election out of the way in Britain. If I'm re-elected, it will take place in Parliament. If I'm not re-elected, it will take place somewhere else. And the first people I'm putting on trial for reasons which you will understand are the journalists, the media, who manufactured the consent for Western governments to massacre, and maim well over 150,000 captives in an open-air prison who've been set upon by their guards and murdered and mutilated. Young children, their mothers, their fathers, their brothers and their sisters. 150,000. 16,000 children alone have been murdered in Gaza, a tiny place, in the last 8 months. But get this, 32,000 Palestinian children have had their limbs amputated. Twice as many as have been killed. It's a very, very big crime, you know. And those who proselytized for it, those who propagandized for it, are to me like Julius Streicher, the publisher of Der Stürmer, the hate sheet of the German Nazi Party, who was hanged by the neck until he was dead by the Nuremberg Tribunal. It's that serious, and it's all coming up over the next 2 hours. It's the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.